it is the greatest fun for me to have a student who's now my boss running the retreat center and telling me what to do. It's fun. I love it. Okay, let me say a prayer for myself and for you. Dear Jesus, you told us not to worry, to be at peace, to trust in you instead of worrying. It's right in the liturgy today. And I beg you that this talk may help me and the people here at this retreat with any anxiety issues they have, and also to help minister to people around them who are anxious. Amen.
Amen.
Okay. So, I'm giving this talk for a very specific reason. I wrote this book with my spiritual director called Escaping Anxiety on the Road to Spiritual Joy. And this book is available in the bookstore. They got many copies just for you in case you wanted it. And it came about in this way. I used to always be mostly angry. Then when I got better at anger, the anxiety surfaced because anger is, in a funny way, anger is a cover for anxiety. And I'll explain that to you. Okay, so when I got better at anger because of 30 years of being in an anger program, all this anxiety came up. So I happened to meet this spiritual director, and he started directing me on specifically on anxiety. And I loved what he said, and I said, we should make a book together about this. Because it's very rare that you have a book of a spiritual director and a directee, because it's supposed to be very confidential. But I have no boundaries, so I don't care about confidentiality at all. I just care about truth. So in any case, so we wrote this book, and I just want to make a point about authors pushing their books. Many of you don't know this. The profits from books go to the publisher and the bookstore, not to the author. Okay, the author makes a tenth if it's not sold at a discount, all right? So when authors are pushing their books, it's not because they're greedy for your money, it's because they put their heart and soul into the book, and they believe it'll help people, and they want you to have it. So you need to know that, because I didn't know that years ago until I became an author. Okay, so I'm pushing this book because it's so terrific, because of this spiritual director of mine and his whole take on anxiety. And it's also very wonderful because it's a masculine, feminine book, because my co-author, who's a spiritual director, was also originally a lieutenant colonel in the Air Force. And so he has a take on masculine things that's very different than mine, and that appeals to men, especially most men respect anyone who's been in the armed forces, so it comes out different. Also, because he happens to have been born in Louisiana, he decided that anxiety is like a swamp, and he carries this metaphor through the whole book, as in these fascinating titles: Anxiety, the dismal swamp, entering the swamp, a swamp at dusk, dark, troubled waters, turmoil on false bayou, running amok in the muck, roots in the shallows, bitter root, deep waters. Is that a tree limb or a snake? Snake in the boat, open waters, where are we? The castle of the swamp queen, sunrise over the swamp. Finally, from the top of the levee. So this is such an amusing metaphor. Besides being amusing, it's really true. So most of us who have problems with anxiety never think of it as a swamp. We think that we're anxious because we should be anxious, because life is full of awful things and anything terrible is going to happen to us any minute, either big or little, see? So we think our anxiety is justified, see? So it's a big leap even to think that anxiety is a swamp. Now, he doesn't mean by anxiety, he doesn't mean normal concern. If an alarm goes off now and they say the hurricane is coming in 10 minutes, you have to be anxious enough to get out of the building, right? That's not this bad anxiety. The bad anxiety is almost perpetual, way exaggerated. It's always about what might happen, not what you have evidence is going to happen. And we'll talk more about this as you'll see. Okay, so here's how he introduces the subject. And I like this very much. Given the choice, would you prefer a life of constant joy or a life plagued with frequent, even constant anxiety? But you'll probably say constant joy just can't be had in this life. That's not a realistic choice. But it is. There's a route, a road to constant joy. Burdened with anxiety, you yet may travel on. So now I was very skeptical of this because this man who I knew for years because he used to work here at the college when I was teaching here and he was part of my writers group and I knew him fairly well. But after I left teaching at the college, I found out that his wonderful wife, who was a charismatic prayer leader and is a prayer leader of mine, that his wife died of Alzheimer's, and he went through everything that a caretaker of Alzheimer's goes through, and that when she died, the nurses around her bed said, "How can you be so joyful when your wife is dying?" And he was just convinced that his wife was going right to heaven. And he had done everything he could for her. And so I took that in. And then, now just to impress you guys, just this week, he had had a bypass, a quadruple bypass 15 years ago. Suddenly this week, he started to get bad heart pains again, had to be rushed to the hospital, to the emergency, maybe have another stints or bypasses or something like that. So I visited him in the hospital, Doctors Regional, and there he is, absolutely joyful and peaceful. So it's for real. Okay, so I promised I would say that. Okay, now, the insight that I found the most interesting of all was what he calls the bitter root judgment at the bottom of anxiety. That's B-I-T-T-E-R, root, R-O-O-T, the bitter root judgment underlying anxiety. And here's how he describes this. Okay. It is an unrecognized, subconscious, negative understanding of reality learned in childhood. It will include self-blame or negative self-judgment. It is an unrecognized pattern of thought, a hidden false assumption about oneself. And this is the example he gives, which is very, very striking. He says when he was a kid, his father ran a sugar mill in Louisiana. He worked very hard. He happened to be clinically depressed, but in those days, no one knew about clinical depression. But anyway, later he found this out, which helped explain his father's ways. So his father would come home, dead tired. He'd eat dinner quickly, then sit with the newspaper in his lap in the living room. And little Al, my friend, little Al wanted to sit with him while he was doing his homework and talk to him. And he never talked to him. He never smiled at him. He would just say, "Look, if you want to do your homework well, go into your bedroom." So his bitter root judgment was that he was ugly, and that's why his father didn't love him. Now, his father did love him in terms of caring love, but not in terms of what we call delight love. And there's some fathers like this who work at jobs they hate out of great love for the family. They certainly love the family, to support the family, but they don't smile at the kids. And then the kids still feel unloved. See? Okay? So his bitter-root judgment was, he figured out somehow in his mind that it was because he was ugly. Now, one reason for this is he had some awful disease when he was a kid, and he was thrown for 2 months into a polio wing of some hospital, and he came out okay, but weak and weaker than most other boys. So when he got to school, he was bullied as being a weakling, see? So that increased that bitter root judgment, I'm not good enough, that kind of thing. Okay, so he challenged me to look to see what is my bitter root judgment. And mine goes this way. My father paid a lot of attention to me and my twin sister, but he was a teacher type. And his idea of love was to teach us things, not to have fun with us, but to teach us things, see? And he wasn't particularly affectionate. So, and then when we were 8 years old, he had never married my mother. That's a long, long story. But anyway, at 8 years old, he came back from a sales trip in Canada to New York City where we lived. And he took us out, we were 8 years old, took us to the corner of the block. And he said, I'm leaving your mother, I'm moving in with this other woman and her daughter. I'm going to see you on Sundays, goodbye. No explanation, no build up. We didn't even understand. My parents never fought in front of us. Later, someone said, didn't they hear the silence? See? So anyway, my bitter root judgment was, men will reject me. I used to think that was just a crazy psychological theory that when parents divorce or separate or whatever, the kids feel they're to blame in some way. But it really is true, I discovered from years and years of counseling. I've been to many counselors and so on and so forth. So this is how this bitter root judgment plays out in my life. Whenever there's a man in authority, if he doesn't smile at me every time I pass him in the corridor, I think I'm going to be fired the next day. See how weird that is, how extreme? So I really like this. So I gravitate toward teddy bear priests because they smile a lot. I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous. The degree of this thing, I'm always thinking I'm going to be rejected. Now, it turned out eventually I had a healing with my father, and he hadn't rejected us at all. He had rejected our mother, and we had a lot of good healing experiences. But it doesn't matter if later you have these healing experiences. There's behind anxiety, according to Al Hughes, the spiritual director. Behind it is this childhood bitter root judgment, which is so strong that it can follow you all your life. See? So to this day, a simple thing, I'm in the church, and this friend of mine who usually sits with us at the daily mass sits 5 rows back that day. He's a friend of mine for 20 years. I immediately think, how did I annoy him that he's sitting 5 rows back? He was sitting 5 rows back because he came in late and didn't want the priest to notice. Duh. But I'm experiencing it as rejection. So then, as a result of this bitter root judgment, what we do is then we feel anxious every time something triggers that bitter root judgment. So every time I see a man who doesn't smile, I think he doesn't like me. Immediately. Now, how many men are there in this room? 3? You smile right away, okay? You didn't smile that way. Sorry. Okay. Now, isn't that ridiculous? See, but it doesn't matter with anxiety. It doesn't matter how ridiculous your reason for anxiety is, because it's unconscious and it's compulsive. It's actually an addiction. So the addiction takes the form of, by my anxious, worried thoughts, I'm going to figure out how to avoid rejection, or how to avoid feeling ugly, or how to avoid whatever that bitter root judgment is, right? So I would figure out immediately, if I happen to have a boss who doesn't smile a lot, I would figure out immediately how to avoid him in every social situation. See, something like that. That takes a lot of thought. If you're in a small environment, how am I going to avoid this, my boss, in social situations? So, what I want to ask you before we go any further is, can any of you think of what, any of you who feel you're kind of overly anxious, think of what could be your bitter root judgment? Now, you can figure this out by reading the book. The book is on display at the bookstore, and you could get the book, or you could get it used in Barnes and Nobles probably by now, or Amazon. But I mean, you could get the book and it'll go into a lot of detail. But just for this purpose right now, at this healing retreat, can any of you think of some other bitter root judgment that you might have, or someone else might have, that underlies your anxieties? Yes.
Fear of failure.
Fear of failure. Okay. So where do you think that came from? When you were a kid, did you feel you failed more than other people or something?
Yeah, I just never wanted to get things wrong.
Get what?
Like get things wrong. I was just scared of.
Scared of being wrong.
Scared
Okay.
of being wrong.
Getting something wrong. Was it because some adults made fun of you if you did, or scolded you, or scolded? Something like that?
Yeah.
Okay, right. So then, that would take the form of, every time you have a challenge that's a little hard, this fear of failure would come up.
Mm-hmm.
See, and then you'd be anxious, and then you try to figure out, well, in college, say, if I always get my work in ahead of time, then I'll never be afraid the teacher will yell at me for not turning in my assignments. See, something like that. You got the idea? So let's just stop for a minute and say a prayer about this. Oh, dear Jesus, you want us not to be afraid. You want us to trust in you. And you never judge us harshly, and you never reject us, and you never think the people you created are ugly. So, Jesus, help us to see ourselves as you see us, as beautiful no matter how we match up to movie stars, beautiful just the way we are, as you created us to be. And help us never to think that you will reject us, or that we will fail in your eyes if we try. Okay? I mean, can you imagine you're going to the pearly gates for the judgment, and Jesus would say, you know, you turned in that paper late when you were 12 years old in school. You know? See how ridiculous it is? Now, humor is a great antidote to anxiety, by the way. If you can laugh at yourself. Like just now, I made a joke of this thing of men who don't smile at me, and I turned it into a joke. And see, then that relieves tension, anxiety, as soon as you turn it into a joke. Now, here's another aspect of anxiety that I want to tell you about, because I have so little time and I have so much to say. Okay, I figure we're always anxious if we have this view of our lives, the following. If I say every morning to myself, I am the heroine of the drama of my life, or if you're a man, you would say, I am the hero of the drama of my life. You others, your secondary characters, who are going to say the things that will enhance my role. See? And so, in order for me to be happy, you all have to do what will enhance my day. See? You can see this is never going to work. So you're always going to be depressed, disappointed, angry, and anxious, because I'm always going to be anxious if I'm counting on Sister Caritas to say not what she did say, but some other thing that I wanted her to say, right? That's never going to work. Okay. But it makes us anxious. Another way of putting this is Jesus said to me in prayer, Rhonda, stop scheming to avoid suffering. Okay, what is scheming to avoid suffering? Every minute of the day, I'm thinking, okay, practically every day. Okay, I'm thinking anxiously, should I mop the floor today or should I wait till right before the guest comes? And the anxiety is the guest could think I'm a lousy, filthy, stinky person if the floor isn't perfectly mopped, okay? Now, I figured out after years of this that most women especially, they feel proud if they go into a house that's messier than theirs, they feel proud that they're better. They feel good. They don't feel bad. But that took a long time for me to figure out. Okay, so you see this? So, scheming to avoid suffering, trying to figure out should I mop the floor today or yesterday. I'm scheming to avoid the suffering that someone might judge me as a slob, right? So it's tiny little things like that. So I can spend an hour trying to figure out whether to mop the floor today or tomorrow, and it only takes 5 minutes to mop the floor. I have a tiny little place. See how ridiculous that is? So behind it is this fear of rejection, bitter root judgment. Okay. Another one is deep prayer. I found that in order to deal with the actually addiction to anxiety, because it's part of scheming to avoid suffering, to avoid that, I have to get much closer to Jesus all the time. Now, since I'm retired, I'm 84, I have all this time to pray. It's absolutely easy for me every time this anxiety wells up to sit in deep prayer like this. Jesus, Jesus, like 3 in and 5 out, very deep prayer. That's called centering prayer, or there's other names for it. Okay, and that gets rid of some of the anxiety, but not if I just do it like I'm going to just do this. I have to sit and really open my heart to Jesus and ask Jesus to come into my heart and take away those stupid, anxious feelings. See? Now, another way is a wonderful prayer that I love now, and many of you know it. It's called the Surrender Novena. How many know the Surrender Novena? Oh, several of you. If you don't know it, write down this name, because you can find it very easily. Dolindo, Dolindo, the Surrender Novena. And you can, just pull it off your computer, print it off your computer. It's a wonderful prayer, and you say very slowly over and over again, oh, Jesus, I surrender myself to you. Take care of everything. So, he can take care of everything. But, so that helps. But another thing that helps is I go to a group I go to, which is like 12-step, but not 12-step, is called Recovery International, and it was founded way before 12-step. It was founded by a Jewish psychiatrist who found that his patients, he could help his patients when they were in the hospital, in the institution, but when they were let out, they couldn't cope with daily life. So he started having weekly groups where they worked on whatever was bothering them in the the outside world when they went back. And this is now an international, worldwide group. And it's for anger, depression, and anxiety. And I've been doing this as a member or as a leader for some 30 years now. It's extremely helpful. And even my family is just delighted that I got into it. They have little sayings that you say to yourself. So one of the sayings is, it's not a 911, okay? So it's not a 911 if a guest came into the house and didn't think I was a wonderful housekeeper, right? Isn't it enough to be a writer and a speaker? Do I have to be a wonderful housekeeper? Come on now. It's not a 911. So you come to the group each week, and these groups, by the way, are online, and they're online and by phone. You don't have to go to a group necessarily. And each time, so I would go to my group this week, and I would say, I was worried about my healing retreat talk. I was thinking, how am I going to get all this wisdom into half an hour? I can't possibly do it. It's ridiculous. How am I going to get them to get my book? See? So then I would say, so then I thought, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to tell them about that authors aren't greedy and why they should get the book, and maybe more people will get the book. See, now that's called taking a secure thought. Instead of just drowning in anxiety, you take a definite thought of why something could turn out better than you thought, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So now, I have a little group here in Corpus Christi that meets on Tuesday afternoon at 2. But what I'd like to do is give you my phone number, give you this reference, Recovery International. If you click on Recovery International, you can find out about other meetings, phone meetings, web meetings, etc. It's free. You know, people make donations, but it's basically free. But if you wanted to call me about anything, I'm here in Corpus Christi and I have nothing to do because I'm retired. So I'm at 860-759-4521. And I'd be happy to talk to you about anything. I'd like you to get the, if you can't afford the book, that's different. But if you can afford the book, I'd like you to read the book first. But otherwise, you know, I would afterwards, I'd be very happy to talk to you about anything like this, if you might want to talk to. I also have here a whole bunch of free vintage books. They're called vintage books. They're old books of mine, which are being given by the publisher for free. You just have to pay postage. So, sister, could you get these out to them? It's a whole list of them. Oh, wait a minute. Let's see. Yeah, there it shows how to get them if you want them. I also happen to have one free book I'm giving away just here, which is a novel about healing in marriage. So if anyone's interested in it, just take it. It's sitting here. You want it? Yeah. Oh, come get it. Mostly I don't have extras, but this one is extra. So I did it. It's time to stop. Does anyone have questions? Are they allowed to ask questions, sister?
Yes, but let me turn the thing off.
Oh, okay. Oh, let me say, I did say a prayer. Let me say another prayer. Okay, dear Jesus, thank you for these lovely people. They're smiling and with such interest, and they're just yearning to be healed of excessive anxiety. So Jesus, help us all. Mary, help us. Immaculate Heart of Mary, help us. Saint Joseph, help us. Guardian angels, help us. Amen. So now we can have questions.